The position is plus 3.7 on Stockfish, and the reason is because we have a race here. I'm trying to push these pawns, they're trying to push these pawns. The biggest difference is quite obvious that I have one in the way of their three, and they have nobody in the way here. These pawns can just go, 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 and who's going to stop them? So this should be pretty clear, just judging by big number, but it actually becomes very, very difficult, even though I don't actually make so much of a mistake in this game. He fought like heck here to make this as difficult as possible. Let's see how that happened here. So knight to g5, threatening this pawn. The pawn's actually very important. I can't really just let it go. Just takes. This starts to really race, and it becomes very unclear from this point. So it would be nice to kind of just be lazy and just not make moves in the side of the board and just push, push, push. But that's not really quite so possible here. So I actually have to play this passive move, rook to f1, which is a better choice than rook to d3, which would have run into maybe some tempos here. e5, f5, e4 can come. So better to just keep this out of the way. Rook to f1, and I can play f4 if need be at any moment now. So e5, they start pushing. a4, I start pushing, right? This should be pretty simple, but this is move now 29:30. We get a half hour more in 10 more moves at move 40. But right now, I am playing with very, very little time. He had a little bit more than me, as I recall. So a5, I continue to push here. Everything is good according to the engine, and rook to e7 actually makes the evaluation jump up from plus 3.8 to plus 4.9, but that doesn't really matter here, because this starts getting quite complicated. And I'm not seeing any of these numbers during the game. b5 would be nice to play, but just rook to c7, and now, you know, this is attacked here. This knight has no way to stay on c5, and I'm actually losing stuff in this direction. So that can change in a hurry. a6 is the obvious move, but now after knight takes a6, you've just lost one of your probably the most valuable pawn on the board, because now knight takes, and you're losing something here, or bishop takes, and you're losing something here. And is this winning right away? Maybe, maybe not. No. You've lost a lot of your advantage now at this point. You know, I just checked with the engine here. So that's not the way to go. Otherwise, you could play something like knight to c8. It's still after like rook to c7. It's not so obvious here that this pawn's just going to go all the way. Okay, maybe it is. Maybe that was kind of actually a better choice here. Knight takes a6. You should play bishop takes a6 to defend here, and takes f3. Again, though, so they actually got two really important pawns for a knight that really wasn't doing much, and now it's not that easy to push. I don't think this is so easy of a decision to make at the time. What I made was the decision I thought was pretty practical, which is knight to c6, trying to trade off here. If my opponent does accept that trade, then this becomes pretty easy, because now there's just kind of less clutter in the way. This is still solidly defended. Let's say my opponent proceeded with some sort of pawn push, like e4, take a6, now b5, b6, and this just rolls kind of uninhibited while my rook can at least stay here and bother this pawn for enough time for these to push. That's not what happened in the game. What happened in the game was rook takes b7, which is a really nice try. So rook takes b7, I had to take that rook, and knight takes e6. And when I saw this, I thought that, you know, no way, we've removed so much clutter here. I just play b5, that actually works out perfectly, that it defends, and this knight is hit, and there's no way anybody is stopping these pawns. Alas, this knight now maneuvers to c8, and stops my pawns. So what do? You can't really just sacrifice one for the other to go. This knight actually holds them pretty well. The engine number is high, but I'm not seeing that during the game. So I'd play c4. I'm like, okay, these two aren't enough. I need my third dude. So I lose this f3 pawn now. I no longer have a bishop defending it. And this bishop is also like doing kind of annoying things in this direction. Can you play rook takes f3? Can you play rook takes f3 to support c5, b6, and a7? Maybe. But is that a risk you really want to take at that time, where now you could lose the game if these pawns don't go all the way? There's weird checks. There's weird checks here. You can't allow for, like, check and takes, right? So you need to move your king to the right square in a position like this. Or knight d6. It's not so clear what's happening. In the game, c5. And all of these moves keep the high engine number. So this is still plus 4.3. But c5 allows bishop to e2. Bishop to e2, now attacking these pawns. This bishop continues to cause me problems. Fortunately, I do have this move, rook takes f5. Which I saw during the game. So now my opponent, what I expected to come was bishop takes b5. And I take this knight, they take here. I would save my knight in this position. So they got, you know, a couple very valuable pawns in exchange for their knight. And in this position, I was comfortable. I could just win. Because I think I would be limiting this pawn. My king would come up. And with the help of all my pieces, the last pawn would reach the promised land. Alas, that's not what happened at all. Because my opponent continues to fight and play the most stubborn defense possible of knight to f7. Knight to f7 here, keeping that knight on the board. So now, you know, these pawns need to show their worth because my opponent did not just sacrifice for them. And it's not so easy. If any of them pushes, then another one is eliminated. So really, the only resource I have here is knight to d6, move 37. Knight to d6, it defends here. And so when this is taken, pawn takes here. And the point being that if you play knight takes d6, now I have a7. I've distracted that knight here, and this pawn should probably reach pretty comfortably. There's no bishop f3 here, so you got to go check to come back here, and then with enough support, or even like the king can come at you at this point, we should be good. But my opponent takes here in the exact right way. They take with the f knight, even though it was doing something important defending here. This knight is more important because takes, you take b5, and now you don't allow me a7, you don't allow me d7. And now you've eliminated, like, we've basically traded this b pawn for this f pawn, and we've traded pieces. My opponent has done a great job splitting up what looked like an unstoppable force with really great defense, and I didn't even really make a mistake. So I take e5, that's all I can do here, and they grab d6, which is correct. They cannot take a6 because d7, and nobody can stop the pawn from getting to d8, but they grab the d6 pawn. Okay, now you need a pawn to win a game. Right, there's no way even just rook versus knight is drawn, or rook versus bishop is drawn, so I must play a7. They must play bishop to c6, and this is the 40th move of the game. Still, the line continues to be pretty forced, though, because I must pretty much play rook to e6 here. That is way too tempting to pass up. We are skewering a couple of guys that are tied down to defending a8. Knight to b5 played, take and take. And this is how we started the video. We've come full circle. Knight to c4 check, I'll note, was possible. King c3, bishop d5, maybe something like this to retain a couple guys. But it gets very difficult. Oops, sorry. After rook to d8 here, this bishop is completely overwhelmed. It's hit. It needs to defend a8, and this knight is getting eliminated. So you might be kind of losing both of your pieces if you choose this route. Knight to b5, so at least for that piece, you eliminate a pawn. And my opponent has now made several great trades. They've made several great trades. Remember, so from what looked to be a terrible, terrible situation of these three pawns that were just going to run them over, first they trade a rook for a bishop and a knight. Not so bad. The next trade they make is, well, they grab that pawn, by the way. They trade this pawn for this pawn. They trade off the knights. They eliminate all my pawns on the board while keeping enough resources to draw the game. Plenty of resources to draw the game. A knight and pawn versus rook is plenty to draw. In fact, a knight versus a rook alone is a draw. So how did I, as I already spoiled, win this game? The only way to win this game is to win the knight outright. The only way to win the knight outright is to prevent it from ever coming close to its forces. If the knight comes here or here such that it's literally just defended at all, I will not win this game, and this game will absolutely be a draw. How can we win the knight outright? Not so easy. If you just try kind of like attacking it, well, this is the first resource that I'll show you. You do have knight, like rook to a8 if it comes to the back rank, and it is lost here. However, it can come knight to b5, and now from here, it will just kind of dance here, until it can just be defended, and then you are drawing this game. What looks to be the best move? Well, I'll let you think about it. I'll actually let you pause the video here and think white to play and win. I'll be back in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. What looks to be the best move, and what all the grandmasters actually suggested, was rook to c5. How could you not play rook to c5? It's so tempting because you maybe have seen this pattern many times of the rook and the knight just like that, wherein this rook is actually taking away every square for the knight. It should be totally doomed here, right? This king just needs to run to b6. Only if you calculate just a little bit, you'll realize that this is not winning at all. So black cannot play king to f7 because check and you win the knight immediately. But all black needs to do then is come towards its knight. Yeah, the knight can't make it to the king, but maybe the king can make it to the knight. King to f8. It's not like I can go check and then come back because check is not a square I have. And now if my king comes at the knight, remember, not king e7, but king e8. And then even at this point, they could play king d7. There's no rook c7 check. And this knight will make it to defense. And if it makes it to defense, a rook versus knight, even if I win this pawn, doesn't even matter. This is a draw. So, rook c5 is not it. What is the move? The move, and here, right, I just made move 40, so I was like at 30 minutes and 5 seconds on my clock. I think I played this move with like 10 minutes on my clock. I was actually thinking so deeply here. So it was really just in time for me. And we had like 2 hours to start. Rook to b6. rook to b6, a very important subtlety. So again, the knight has no squares. It doesn't have here. The only reason it doesn't have c8 is a small tactical point. I have rook to b8, winning that knight. The other point is that the king cannot come at the knight. This is the biggest difference between rook to b6 and rook to c5, right? If you play king to f7, I go check and win the knight. If you play king to f8, you might be able to figure this out now. I check, bring the king to the 7th rank, and now eliminate the knight. So with that in mind, there's actually not that many moves you can do, because g5, if you push this pawn, also falls to the same reason king f8 falls. Check, I force you to the 7th rank and eliminate the knight. So you need to be able to have, on rook b8, you need to be able to have king h7 where you're shielded from checks. This is a really, like Dvoretsky-esque, like, call Mark Dvoretsky himself and put this position in the next endgame manual. Okay, anyway, rook to b6, but it's not nearly over yet, because my opponent has just 2 moves we've narrowed it down to, king h8 and king h7. It's really not much difference between them. My opponent played king to h7. Neither of them allow for, like, a pawn push or anything else next turn. Right? The king is cut off. This pawn cannot push because check, I will win the knight. But what king h7 does threaten, actually, that king h8 doesn't, is this move, knight to c8. It looks like rook to b6 shouldn't work, actually, because of king to h7. It looks like knight to c8 is now threatened. I don't have rook b8 winning the knight, and the knight can come towards its own forces for defense. However, here's the key point. I play king to c3, bring my king in, right? So this is how I want to eliminate the knight. I want the rook to keep it in a box, and then the king eats it once it is in the box, right? So king to c3, we bring that in. Knight to c8, what else can you play? What else can you play, right? You don't want to go back to where you came from. g5, you lose it. Only option is knight to c8. And now, again, rook to e6. It's the pattern we talked about of the rook and the knight like so, except this isn't the box, right? This looks like a much more obvious box to create, but this box is actually much bigger. So we are cutting off these squares, not even 100% of squares, leaving this one open. Why is it okay to leave that one open? Because the king is just in time. King to c4, and now you are stuck on these 2 squares. My king covers b5, my rook covers c6, and d6 and e7. So this knight has no way out of a slightly larger box. A slightly larger box, and eventually this king will come all the way at this knight. Knight to c8, king here, knight a7, here. We didn't play this all the way out, but oops, maybe there is more precise, and we will eat it. Why, though? So, okay, we're just talking about this position, though. My opponent, you can't do anything with your king. That's the other beautiful part of this. For example, king g8, I win it with check. g5, what's the winning move here? This is actually really nice. The king is just barely too far, because if this pawn could start pushing, it would cause, like my pieces need to be at the exact perfect squares. If you could, like, force some sort of minor distraction here, the knight would be free, right? And then you would be able to draw the game. But g5, immediately I can win with rook to c6. And knight to a7 or e7, I win it with rook to c7. The king is too far from the knight in this specific position, so there's actually nothing black can do. They can't move their g-pawn, and they can't move their king. The only move they can play was knight a7, king c4, taking away that square. Now king g8, my opponent tried. King g8, now that the knight is free, this is what happened in the game. Realizing that knight to c8, I'm just going to be able to come off after it, but king to g8 actually allows me to win the game right away with rook to a6, and this was the last move of the game with my opponent resigning here. The knight could not go to either of these squares. Knight to c8, rook to a8 now, and I would win the knight. So a really, really nice ending to this game. I was very proud of this game. My opponent really, really fought hard to try to save this game, and this was a crazy one. Just with the time scramble, with the pawn storms and the races and everything. But rook to b6, very nice stuff here. King to c3 and rook to e6 to keep the knight in a nice little box here. This was a study-like position that actually was not a study. That was my game. That 4 grandmasters that I've showed it to, I won't name them, have gotten them wrong. Hopefully you got it right. See you guys in the next video.
William Grave, the Gambit man, takes his seat at the board. e4, e5, knight f3, bishop c5. The Bushcast Gambit on the board. On with the Gambit classes. Hero Pod unlocked!